For years, horror fans have been searching for something that feels genuinely new. Not necessarily bigger, not necessarily more action-focused, just something capable of making players uncomfortable again. And that's exactly why ILL has managed to attract so much attention. Despite coming from a relatively small development team, the game has quietly become one of the most talked about upcoming horror projects. Between its disturbing creature designs, realistic physics, and heavy emphasis on atmosphere, many players have started wondering whether ILL could become one of the genre's biggest surprises. So today, we're taking a closer look at everything we know about ILL, what makes it different, and why so many horror fans are keeping an eye on it.
ILL is an upcoming first-person survival horror game being developed by Team Clout. While the project has been in development for several years, interest around the game increased dramatically after recent trailers showcased its impressive visual quality and disturbing enemy designs. At first glance, comparisons to Resident Evil or Dead Space are inevitable, but the developers appear to be aiming for something that relies less on action and more on immersion, tension, and physical realism. And that's where things start to become interesting.
Well, good luck.
One thing that immediately stands out about ILL is the type of horror it focuses on. Many modern horror games rely heavily on scripted jump scares. ILL appears to be taking a different approach. Instead of constantly trying to surprise the player, the game seems more interested in creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Rooms feel abandoned, hallways feel oppressive, and enemies appear unpredictable. The result is a style of horror that feels closer to classic survival horror experiences, where tension is often more effective than sudden scares. Perhaps the biggest reason why ILL generated so much discussion is its enemy design. The creatures shown so far are deeply unsettling, not simply because they look grotesque, but because of the way they move. Animations appear fluid and unnatural at the same time, creating the impression that these monsters are living organisms rather than traditional video game enemies. There are obvious influences from films like The Thing, as well as games such as Dead Space. And judging by the reactions online, it's clear that these designs have already left a strong impression on horror fans.
Another area that continues to attract attention is the game's presentation. Lighting, environmental details, and overall atmosphere all contribute to a world that feels remarkably believable. For a project coming from a smaller studio, the visual quality has surprised many players. In fact, some people initially assumed that parts of the trailers were pre-rendered because of how detailed everything looked. Of course, visuals alone don't guarantee a great game, but they certainly help establish the kind of atmosphere that horror games depend on.
One of the most interesting aspects of ILL is its focus on physical interactions. Objects react naturally, enemies seem to respond dynamically to attacks, and environments appear far more interactive than what players typically expect from the genre. This emphasis on realism could make encounters feel more unpredictable, and unpredictability has always been one of the most effective tools in horror, because fear often comes from not knowing exactly what will happen next.
Despite all the attention surrounding its visuals, ILL still appears to embrace many traditional survival horror ideas. Limited resources, constant tension, careful exploration, and the feeling that every encounter matters. Those elements are part of what made classic Resident Evil games memorable in the first place, and many fans are hoping that ILL can capture some of that same atmosphere while introducing its own identity.
As impressive as everything looks, there are still important questions.
Creating a memorable horror game requires much more than strong trailers. Storytelling, pacing, enemy variety, and overall gameplay balance are equally important. And history has shown that not every visually impressive project manages to live up to expectations. That's why many players remain cautiously optimistic. Excited, but realistic. At this stage, Ill remains one of the most intriguing horror games currently in development. Not because it's trying to reinvent the genre, but because it seems to understand what makes horror effective in the first place. Atmosphere, uncertainty, and the constant feeling that something isn't right. Whether the final game lives up to the growing expectations remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. Ill has already succeeded in doing something many horror games struggle to achieve. It has people's attention. And in today's industry, that's not something every game can accomplish.
They were really rushing out of their workday. Head to the dome. It might be your only way.
And that's all for today. If you're enjoying the video, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate the support.